All right, guys, welcome to episode 4. I'm going to read you a few headlines and then we're going to kick this episode off. Lost hiker found alive after 7 days at Guadalupe Mountains National Park. Hiker falls to his death. Hiker found dead on Guadalupe Peak Trail in Guadalupe Mountains National Park. A man and his stepson die while hiking in Big Bend. Hiker rescued after wandering lost at Big Bend National Park for more than a week. So I bet you're wondering what all these headlines have to do with today's episode. Well, as you know, you got to stick around to find out. Well, here we are, episode 4. I want to welcome all listeners to the Trailblazing Texas Podcast. I'm your host, Jason. And if you haven't guessed, today's episode is going to be about hiker safety. I want to apologize for missing the rotation. I think it was last Monday, dropping an episode. I had a backpacking trip and then a wine vacation with my wife and just ran out of time. So I do apologize for that. And what I'd like to do is just kind of highlight some of the main points of this topic that are important to me. By no means, are these the most important, the only topics about hiking and backpacking safety. These are just some of a few that I think are very important to me, and that I'll also, there's a couple that have actually impacted me while I was on the trail. So I think kind of just to kick this off, I don't know if, I don't know through social media or these influencers or we go out on the trail, maybe a few times and we start to, I think, build up an unrealistic sense of security that, nothing's going to happen to me on the trail. Everything's going to be fine. And that's just not the case. Stepping on the trail, there's no guarantee that, something's not going to happen to you. You're not going to come across something tragic. It's just the nature of the beast, I guess. The more we have an understanding of this, that there's no guarantee and that every time we step on a trail, something could happen, the more that we prepare ourselves mentally, physically, equipment-wise, I think the better it increases our chances to eliminating, anything tragic that I wouldn't say eliminating, but lessen the chances of anything tragic happening to us. And then also, if we stumble across an incident where we need to step in to help, that we're prepared and we, maybe have some actions that will help the person. So to me, the very first most important safety tip that is the absolute most important to me is get rid of the water bladders. I know they're popular. I know a lot of people use them, but if you just think about it logically, I'm on the Lone Star Hiking Trail, 10 miles in. I'm using a water bladder, and like just logically having all your water, all your eggs in one basket, having all your water in a container. And what happens if something happens to that container? Water bladders can get punctured, water bladders can leak, and then you're in trouble. There are very few people, and I can probably count 3 that if they had a water bladder would still hike with me. I do not hike with people with water bladders. They're a danger. I hike with smart water bottles. And the reason why is usually I have not just one with me. So I have 2 or 3 liter smart water bottles. And guess what? If one mysteriously gets punctured somehow or the cap unscrews and comes off, well, I'm only losing that liter of water. I have 2 to 3 other liters of water in separate vessels that I can get water from. Somehow, if the lid comes off and it's my last bit of water, I can still fill that water bottle if I come to a creek, if I come to a pond. And guess what? My filter fits on the top of a smart water bottle. If I have a bladder, I mean, just think about it. If you have a bladder, it gets punctured, you lose your water. Okay, maybe you repair it, duct tape, because you have your first aid kit with you. And it has duct tape in it, or your trekking poles have duct tape on them, and you repair it. Okay, it doesn't leak anymore. So now how are you going to filter the water if you were able to find that pond and you could fill up that bladder? How are you going to filter that water so you end up not getting sick? So in my 8 to 9 years of hiking and backpacking, the only two dangerous situations that I've been in are because of water bladders. And it's mainly you lose visibility. For me, as kind of, let's say I'm the more experienced hiker, like I don't have visibility of how much water you have. You don't have visibility of how much water you have. And what happens is like you maybe have the mindset that this is a magical water bladder and it just will never run out of water. And you don't know when you stop halfway, like how much water, or as you're hiking, you don't know how much you've already consumed. And on hot days, you're probably drinking a whole lot more than what you would normally drink. With smart water bottles, also, every time I stop, every time I grab a water bottle, I always know the levels of water that I have. I know, okay, I have this plus 2 other liters, and I'm halfway done with this bottle. I'm at mile whatever of the hike, and I'll finish the remaining half of this by mile X, and then I'll have 1 to 2 other liters for the trip back. Like, you're always thinking of the amount of water you have, and then the duration of the trip. With a water bladder, you can't do that, and I'm sure there's probably tons of other reasons why you shouldn't use a water bladder, but these are just a few. And I guess before we jump into the further safety tips, I'll never try to tell someone how to hike and what they need to be doing. Definitely offer suggestions, but at the end of the day, you should be responsible for you, and you should hike your own hike. That's a kind of a famous hiking term, meaning that hike your own hike. If you want to carry a bladder and use it, I guess go ahead, but you just understand that there are issues that could arise. Or if you want to carry heavy gear and you don't want to go ultralight, like hike your own hike. So let's kind of get that out in the open, that for me, these are just suggestions, and I'll never mandate someone hike a certain way. But if you're carrying a water bladder and you're not John, Sam, or Henning, you're not hiking with. All right, the next safety topic that's important to me is anytime you go on a hike, think about all the possibilities that can happen and how you're going to handle it. So to give example, when I plan a hike, I'm usually every weekend during my hiking season, which is like September through May, and then maybe into June a bit if I can catch some cooler days. But almost every weekend, I'm either on a hiking backpacking trip or I'm hiking on the Lone Star Hiking Trail. So when I decide to hike on the Lone Star Hiking Trail and I start to pick out, the section that I want to hike on, I always spend about 30 minutes and just think, what are all the things that can happen? I'm looking at the weather, I'm looking at the temperatures, I'm looking at a map. And for the Lone Star Hiking Trail, like one of the things that I have to think about is snake bites, getting ticks. Like, how am I going to maybe try to prevent? And also, how am I going to handle it if it happens? So if I get bit by a snake and I'm looking at the map, like, where are all the bailout points? What trailheads am I going to be crossing? What roads am I going to be crossing? What am I going to do if it happens? So just, go through these, if a wild dog comes out at me, how am I going to handle that? Because it happens. On the Lone Star Hiking Trail, you have some, I don't want to say meth addict, weird people, but you sometimes experience some weird people on the trail. How am I going to handle that? Heat exhaustion. What's going to happen, if it's supposed to be in the 90s and I just get caught in a section where there's no tree cover, and like, how am I going to handle this kind of thing? I have my satellite device. It's connected to my phone. Like, so you go through these things. And one thing I noticed, I love reading about stories where, I mean, a lot of them are ends in tragedy and bodies are found years later. But there's a lot of importance to these stories. How these people made mistakes, and usually these people that are in these stories, they chronicle like, oh, I tried to do this, I tried to do that, and then nothing's working, and it always seemed to when these people get into these situations, and as soon as they make one bad choice, like the next choice is even worse, and they just kind of snowball into bad choices, and it would just appear to me that they've not thought through, like, if I get lost, or what am I going to do? There's this one lady. She was in her 60s hiking the AT. Her trail name was Inchworm, and she just stepped off the trail to go use the restroom and got lost, and she couldn't find the trail again. And this has happened to me once, not that I was lost because I kind of knew the direction, but what I'm about to kind of get into is kind of another kind of safety tip. But I've seen people on the Lone Star hiking trail, they'll go off to use the restroom, and then after, a bit of time, I'm kind of like looking around, and I see them when they're walking in a totally different direction. And so, you're yelling at them, "Hey, we're over here." So that kind of happened to me, stepping off the trail to use the restroom. And what I used to do is I would have my trekking poles. And as soon as I left the trail and went to, at 200 feet from the trail, or, leave no trace principles, I would always point my trekking poles back towards the trail. That's fine and good. And you can certainly build a habit. And I think that's important, is to build these habits that, you don't even have to think. Well, I built a habit and then got to the point where every time I use the restroom, I would drop my trekking poles in the direction of the trail. And then what happens the first time you don't have trekking poles? So I just went and used the restroom. Wasn't paying attention, because I built a habit with a piece of gear that I may not always have. So I did kind of get like turned around, and I had to use my phone to get back to the trail. But it startled me there for a second. So I changed that habit, and now I just point my body. So I know when I exit the trail, it's at my back. When I get to where I need to be to use the restroom, I will just turn 180 degrees and face the direction of the trail. So that's just something to think about, is we want to probably develop habits where we're not dependent on any type of certain gear. We want to build these types of habits with what we're always going to have, and I'm always going to have my body. But yeah, so like when you're planning this stuff and kind of going through worst case scenarios, you should have a phone, you should have a map, you should have electronic device, you should have a satellite device. So all these things, as you're going through these things, you say, okay, I'm going to use my phone, I'm going to use my GPS, I'm going to whatever. But this should all be part of that plan, every time you're going hiking. All right. The next point that's important to me is have an understanding of your gear, know its limits. I live in North Houston, so I'm, as we just discussed a second ago, I'm usually on the Lone Star hiking trail or on a backpacking trip every weekend. But I use the Lone Star hiking trail and its weather conditions to test out my gear, whether it's tents, sleeping bags, or I don't use sleeping bags, I use quilts, but tents, quilts, rain gear, backpacks, day packs, shoes, because I can really get a good sampling of the weather, just out on the weekend. And so when I usually plan a trip, I'm not so much worried about the weather. Like, I'm not going to go hiking in a thunderstorm, but if it's raining, I'll still go out. I'll bring my rain gear, my hiking boots, trail runners, which I normally hike in, and I just hike and I get an understanding of how these boots, how these shoes, how this rain gear performs. I don't know that I'll ever be in a very dangerous situation, but you never know, right? So I always want to have an understanding. My backpacks, are they water resistant, waterproof, or is there still ways that water gets into them? Does my rain pants and rain jacket shield off the water? How do these shoes perform in mud? How do these shoes perform, or boots perform in really wet conditions where you're kind of walking through water? It just gives me a lot of opportunities to have time with my gear and just see how it performs. I definitely don't want to be in a situation in the Guadalupe Mountains in the backcountry, it's 19 degrees and I have a quilt that fails on me, or I have a jacket that fails on me, or shoes that fell on me, like that would be dangerous because, there's 2 to 3 times a year I'm in the Guads and could be snowing, could be raining, high winds, 50, 60 miles an hour, 19 degrees this last trip at night for 2 of the nights in snow. And so, you definitely want to have an understanding of how all this gear works. And also your first aid kit. What are you carrying in your first aid kit? So as you're hiking, think about, aspirins, diarrhea medicine, Band-Aids, tourniquet. I mean, I don't know. And then you modify that first aid kit for, what you needed and you didn't have. So, one time I needed a lighter, so I added a lighter. Due to the ticks, I added tick prevention. So, this gear can evolve. Your first aid kit as a piece of gear can evolve. It can evolve per seasons. It can evolve per type of hike. Like maybe I don't take blister protection for hikes that are under 20 miles. Anything over, I know I start to get hot spots. And I know this because I've been out on the trails testing out these shoes with these socks and I can, maybe start to feel this or start to feel that after a certain amount of miles. So yeah, I mean, this whole thing, you're always pushing your gear, understanding its limits and making the needed adjustments. I think kind of to go along with that, and maybe you can consider a piece of gear, but you definitely need to have trail apps for your phone. When you're hiking, you should always have your cell phone. And for me, and this is just me, I think you need to have a minimum of 3 trail apps. And I would say you should be exceptional at one, you should be proficient at another, and you should have a basic understanding of a third. And I think if you're a new hiker or backpacker, probably for an example, all trails would probably fit everything that you want to ever need or want to do. It's usually all the established trails. It gives you distances, gives you map, it gives you an offline option. So you should understand all that. You should understand that if you don't have cell service, you could have pre-downloaded the map and you will still through GPS have a little ping on that map. You should play around with it as you're on the trail, looking around as you're moving through the trail and as you can find your ping. Maybe a second app as you get more experienced and you maybe get into some off-trail stuff, Gaia or Backcountry Navigator, or Maprika. I use that as well. So yes, that's very important to always have your cell phone, always have a charger, and make sure that you have knowledge of trail apps. And you should, I think at least 3 you should be pretty darn good at. The next point is this is hard, and maybe for probably most beginners, you may not need it, but I say there's tons of ways that you can print or take paper maps. And let's say if you live in my area, you start on the Lone Star Hiking Trail, getting into hiking and backpacking. You can download the section maps from their website, and it's so important. And this has happened to me a lot in Guadalupe Mountains where my phone didn't charge at night for whatever reason. I didn't catch it. And then I head out on a trail and my phone's dead. So outside of me being mad where I can't take pictures, now I can't look at a map. So I started carrying also a paper map. But, and thank goodness that I know the park so well that, you never really feel, even though we heard in the intro, people have been lost out at Guadalupe Mountains. It's never happened to me, but it could. So I always carry a paper map in conjunction with any kind of apps on my phone, just in case my phone dies, my phone falls, my phone breaks. I still have that paper map. And you don't have to be an expert at reading a map to carry a paper map. I can I can read a map for some basic navigation, but if I'm going to have to off trail something and be reading a map, I'm in trouble. I'm going to need to have John, Henning, or Sam with me. And thank goodness Henning and Sam are usually with me on my epic trips because they're the map readers. But what I do, and it's really nice on the Lone Star hiking trail because it's a pretty flat trail. You're not having to worry about elevation gains, losses, being cliffed out, and what that looks like on a topographical map. But what I can do is print out these section maps. I have them, they're laminated, and I play a game. So, like, I'll start hiking, and I usually hike between 2.5 and 2.8 miles per hour. Oh, that's another tip. Have an understanding of how fast you hike at an elevation when it's flat, because if you can, and also take note of when you start hiking. You have this paper map, and you can say that, okay, I started at 8 o'clock. It's 9 o'clock now, and I usually hike about 2.5 miles per hour or 2.8 miles per hour. And you can look at that paper map, and usually they'll have mile markers, or you can figure out like kind of where you're at based on your rate of how fast you hike. So that's another thing that I don't think I had it, but it just popped in my mind. So when you start a hike, take a picture of the trailhead sign, and that'll timestamp when your hike starts, or just make a mental note from your watch or your phone of what time you're starting. I usually, before I start hiking, I look at the hike that I'm going to do and notice, okay, roads, bends in the trail, creek crossings, all these types of things. I just make mental notes. And then so what I do is I'll hike for an hour or so, and then I'll just stop. I'll pull out the paper map and I play a game. Where am I? So I don't look at my phone. I look at the paper map. I'm like, all right, my first picture of the trailhead sign was at 8 o'clock. We're going to use that as an example. And it's 9:30. So I've been hiking an hour and 30 minutes. I hike at 2 miles an hour. So that would be like an hour and a half of hiking. So that's, 2.5 miles. So 3 miles I should be on the trail. So I look in the map. Yep, here's mile marker number 3, or here's 3 miles along the trail. And also I start thinking about, okay, what roads have I crossed already? What creeks have I crossed already? What bends in the road have I crossed already? And I kind of put all this stuff together, and then I'm thinking, okay, I'm probably here. And then what I do is I open up the app on my phone with the downloaded map, and then I compare them. Okay, I thought I was here. Oh yeah, I'm pretty close, or I'm like way off, which when I first started playing this game, I was always way off, because you're not really thinking about kind of some of the stuff that I just explained, and over time and over experience, you kind of incorporate that stuff. But yeah, so take a paper map and just play a game. Where am I? And I do this when I'm solo hiking, probably 3 or 4 times out of the hike, and I'm usually hiking I don't know, 10 to 20 miles usually, and I'll play the game, and it's fun. And now I've gotten to be pretty good where I can predict kind of how fast I'm going, just from experience. And then sometimes I play where am I at, just based on the pace that I think I'm at and where I'm at on the map. Sometimes I won't worry about the pace, and I'll just worry about road crossings and creek crossings. How many have I done? And bends in there, and didn't try to locate on the map where I'm at based on that. And then sometimes I combine it where I have things that I've experienced on the trail that would be noted on the map versus, how the rate at which I'm hiking, the speed. So it's a fun game, and definitely, kind of flat, easy trails are a certain way to kind of ease into this game and start to get a comfort with reading maps, paper maps. I think the next topic that I'd like to talk about is be prepared for the unexpected. And I'm horrible at this. I always just make the assumption that I'm not going to need something instead of just taking it. And this happens a lot when I'm day hiking. And for example, well, there are two examples. So one, I made a video. I was hiking with Henning in the backcountry of the Guads, and I just said, I'll pack my day pack in the morning. Morning came, and my mind was elsewhere and probably trying to get Henning up. I forgot to pack my hat. I forgot to pack my sunglasses. I forgot to pack my first aid kit. I forgot to pack my inReach satellite device. So I was already, once I started to get into some elevation, and we were probably about an hour from, no, we drove to a different campsite. So we were 2 hours away from my stuff by car. Yeah, I just started realizing everything I forgot. And the reason why I realized is because I needed some of that stuff. There was not a cloud in the sky. It was, sunny. And even if it's 30 degrees in the Guads and you're up at elevation, there's not a cloud in the sky. The sun's just beating down on you. And so, yeah, I was just put me into a funk. But what I should have done is packed my pack the night before and packed for the unexpected, packed for a sunny day, packed in case overcast came and it became really cold. So that means warming layers. It happened to me in this past trip. We started and it was probably, I don't know, 27, 28 degrees. And I had layers, which is what you need because, as you start hiking, you're shucking layers. And I remember looking at my puffy and I'm like, oh, it's going to be hot today. I'm not going to take it. And guess what? Yeah, I didn't need it while I was hiking, but whenever I stopped and we were eating, yeah, it got chilly. And I'm like, man, why didn't I bring my puffy? So point of all this is be prepared for the unexpected. If there's a chance that you need something, pack it. And I think, like I said before, this really hits me more with putting together my day pack than my backpacking, multi-day backpack pack. Because, it's just day hiking. I'm not really worried about anything because it's just for a day. And I'm like, I don't want to take this. I don't want to take that. But you need, just put it in your day pack. But be prepared for the unexpected. So a couple of times where the person I was hiking with, Greg, John, and Raymond, I will not mention their names, use water bladders. They ran out of water. And for John and Greg, I had extra water because I learned from my stepdad, Raymond, who ran out of water on Guadalupe Peak, to carry extra water. I had extra water for those, for the Greg and John, but carry extra water, carry extra snacks. And usually people that I hike with probably have hiked more than them, except for my Mount Rushmore of hikers, as I've mentioned, John, Sam, and Henning. Yeah, but carry extra water. And there's multiple ways that you can, well, I mean, carrying extra water is carrying extra water, but let's say I'm hiking with someone who's inexperienced and I want to carry extra water in case they run out. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll camel a liter of water. So driving to the trailhead or getting to the trailhead, I'll drink a liter of water. So that gives me the hydration that I need, for the first part of the hike. I'll carry a liter or two for the duration of the hike. So getting somewhere and back. And then I'll carry an extra liter just in case someone in my party needs it. Carrying extra snacks. I mean, somebody forgets to bring their snacks. Just had an example of both of these cases. This last trip at Guad, I was hiking with my youngest son. We show up at the trailhead. I get out of the car. He gets out of the car. I grab my day pack and he's just standing there. And I'm like, where's your backpack? He's like, oh, I didn't know I needed one. I go, we're hiking. And he goes, yeah, but I didn't know it was a long hike. I go, it doesn't matter. We're hiking. And so he didn't have snacks. He didn't pack any water. So thank goodness, I had packed extra snacks and extra water. So again, it's being prepared, and to this, make sure your first aid kit is always resupplied, or I'm not always in my first aid kit with the aspirin and stuff. So at some point, this stuff is going to expire. So just make sure that you're always checking, probably before every hike is you're always checking. Like for me, does the lighter work? Yes. Do I have all the essentials with blister protection, Band-Aids, sunscreen, rotate that out because I don't want to use 3-year-old sunscreen, mosquito spray, tick spray, which is, I use 2 different products for those. So just kind of going through, pulling out everything of your first aid kit and just making sure, it's still valid. It's not expired, that sort of thing. Also, for me, this is a big deal when I'm hiking, maybe not so much day hiking, but when I take trips with Sam and Henning, they know that I wear a bracelet. They know what this bracelet means. So it's my medical conditions, it's my contact information, it's what medication that I'm on. Henning knows my cell phone password. He knows that my cell phone is connected to my GPS. He knows how to use my cell phone to message through my GPS. He knows how to use my GPS to a message in case something happens to me. He knows how to access my phone. He knows how to send messages, to read the messages. He knows first responders get there. He knows about my bracelet. He knows to tell them, here's all his medical history and all that sort of thing. So it's very important as you're being prepared for the unexpected. Is I'm not, it's up to you to share your password and stuff. I trust Henning. He's not going to, I don't know what you would even do knowing a password to a cell phone, but he's not going to steal my cell phone and sell it on the black market. But yeah, I trust him, and I relay that information just in case something happens to me. He has that information and can do the necessary to save my life and I guess save our lives. All right, for the last point, and as we kind of start to wrap this up, this is another important one. And I would say if I had to order this one and the importance to me, this is probably one of the if not one, definitely number 2, is before you go out on a hike, after you have it planned, let somebody know of what you're doing. So like every time I go hiking, whether I'm on a trip, whether it's just here locally, I tell Lori, okay, on this day, we're going to hike this trail. We're probably going to start at this time, probably going to be expected to end around this time. If I'm going to the Lone Star hiking trail, before I leave, I tell her, okay, I'm going to head out to trailhead number 9. I'm going to hike towards trailhead number 8. I'm going to do, 8 miles one way and then 8 miles back. I should probably be finished by this time. And when you commit the itinerary to somebody, I guess to step back, you want to commit this itinerary to someone so they know if they don't hear back from you at a certain time that they're going to send the cavalry. They're going to call first responders, report you missing, and go ahead and get that started, initiated for your rescue. But like I was saying is, I'll tell Lori, like heading to the Lone Star Hiking Trail, I'm driving to trailhead 9. I'm probably going to do 8 miles. I'm going to head towards trailhead 8 and then back. And do not change the itinerary. If you commit to something, be faithful to it. Be faithful to that plan. But I'm not saying that you can never change the plan. So, for example, one time I was heading to Trailhead 6 and it was a complete lake out there. So I texted Lori and said, hey, I'm at Trailhead 6. It's unhikeable. I'm going to drive to Trailhead 9 and then I'll probably be there in about 30 minutes and start hiking. Let me know that you've received. Well, she never texted me back to say, hey, I received it. All's good. So I ended up just driving home because I wasn't going to change my itinerary if I couldn't confirm that she's received the message and that, the message went through and that there's no issues with that. So always tell somebody where you're going, who you're going with, when you're going to start, when you're expected to be back home, the distance that you're going to be hiking. You read so many stories on the PCT, the AT, the Continental Divide Trail, where people go missing for years. And a lot of times it's because they were supposed to have done this, and then they went on this side trail and no one knew, and then that they went on that side trail, and they're up on this, climbing this mountain, and there's a rock fall and they get crushed and killed. And then years later, by accident, somebody's out there and discovers their body when they've been searched for years. So, and it was all because maybe they gave an itinerary to somebody and then ended up not following the itinerary. So it's very important before you step on the trail, neighborhood hike. Like Lori, when she goes on a neighborhood hike, she goes, I'm going on a hike. I'm hiking up to, this park, or I'm hiking to that park. So even just a neighborhood hike, and as trivial as that may seem, we're always letting each other know the itinerary of our hike. All right. So as we wrap up, and as hopefully listening to the other podcasts episodes, that I always like to end with a hiker and a safety tip. Well, this podcast, as I was going solo, my first solo podcast, pretty rough. I was all over the place. I've given a whole bunch of hiker safety backpacker tips, but if you listened to episode 2 with John, I forgot to ask him what his hiker and safety backpacking tip was. And so I had sent him a text maybe about a week ago when I had already recorded this and then deleted it because I didn't feel comfortable, and I was going to re-record it, then ran out of time and went on my trip. But I just texted him, what was his safety tip again? And so he wanted me to relay to all the listeners that, before you step on a hike, know the map and get a general sense in your mind of the map and what you're going to be hiking. Like, so mentally prepare, mentally have an understanding, you're going to have creek crossings, you're going to have elevation gains. What is that going to kind of look like? But yeah, you'll definitely have him on a future podcast and let him to expand upon that. I hope this episode has been beneficial. I hope that at least you start to get into the mindset that when we step on the trail, it's not a guarantee that we're coming back. And I hope that you start to get into that mindset and thinking about all the ways that maybe not guarantee you, but better your odds at overcoming something tragic that may or may not or could happen on the trail, or you experience someone else having a horrible situation and you're able to intervene because you were prepared for the unexpected. You had extra gear, extra snacks, extra water. You're able to use all your electronic devices, or understand how to use this, how to contact first responders, and what are you going to do in certain situations. So I really hope that, I hope at the very least that this gets you thinking in this mindset. And, this isn't, if we wanted to talk about hiker and backpacker safety, we could probably sit here and talk for hours, because there's tons and tons and tons of things, items that kind of go into this. But these are, my 6 or 7 top that I think definitely will get you started on the right foot as you decide or start to get into hiking and backpacking. And even for the intermediate and experienced, maybe this could be just a reminder that you've been out on 100 trips and nothing has ever gone wrong, and you start to not get cocky, but you start to have a comfort, and maybe this will bring in a reminder that, we should always be prepared, and we should kind of develop a routine to kind of go through this. And as I'm ending this, I will not give a safety tip, but Henning had a wonderful idea when we were rock climbing the other day, is that we should, outside of ending the episode with a hiker and a safety tip, we should end the episode also with like a piece of gear that we've come across that we find of value. So I thought that was a really good idea. So I'm not going to end with a safety tip because we've had a bunch of them, but I'm definitely going to end with a piece of gear. There's not a lot of gear that I've used that I really felt changed in a positive way the way I hike, and I call these game changers. It's Trekker Joe's water bottle shoulder holder. So this piece of gear fits on your backpack where your shoulder straps are, and you can carry liter water bottles or even smaller. And the beauty of this is like I'm 51. Before, I used to have to take my backpack off, reach, and grab my water. Like I couldn't be hiking and grab my water because I can't bend my arms back in those pockets. But having that water bottle holder right in front, as I'm like, I could do with one hand, undo the lid as I'm nonstop. Like I'm not stopping, I'm continue hiking, grab the water, drink, put it back, put the lid back on. And then it blew my mind to think I can have two. So I can carry 2 liters of water right here in the front, have access to them. And that was just mind blowing. It is the greatest piece of gear that I believe that I own. I have Z-Packs, Hyperlight backpack, Z-Pack tents, Ultra, Lone Peak trail runners, and that Trekker Joe's water bottle holder is the absolute best piece of gear that I own. Also, he makes some really nice Dyneema bags that I just got and I just used on my latest Guadalupe trip. I love those. Those were awesome. But that water bottle holder was just amazing. And what was really cool is on my Guadalupe Peak trip in October, so we were carrying 4 or 5 liters of water, and having 2 liters in the front and having 2 liters on the side, the backpack felt completely different. Like there was a weight balance. So it wasn't all the weight pulling down on my back. There was weight on the front and the back. And I never would imagine that would have been a thing, that the backpack would feel so much different, but it did. It felt great. And I think that was the first thing that I mentioned to Joe when I got back from that trip, that, I did this and it was absolutely incredible. And this episode is not a paid endorsement by Trekker Joe's or Joe. This is just, I want to let you guys know that there's just some amazing gear that he makes, and that water bottle shoulder holder is worth its weight in gold, platinum, titanium. But so that's probably going to be something that we start ending episodes on too, is just outside of the safety tip, but maybe a piece of gear that we really want to kind of highlight. We're going to keep on trucking. Again, sorry for the late drop of this podcast, but yeah, I recorded it, didn't like it, deleted it, then thought that I could re-record it and ran out of time. But anyway, we got it dropped. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you find that it's a benefit, and just want to tell you all, have a wonderful week, wonderful weekend, and get outside and get on the trails. Later.